1 year, and that turned out to be a huge lie. I'm still here. I'm retired, 46 or 47 years later. So, but anyway, having had the pleasure of working for both Getty, Texaco, and Chevron, I had a chance to work across a number of technologies, including programmable controllers, microwave, telecommunications, and then Texaco and both Chevron had gotten into the power generation business, cogeneration. So associated with that was, of course, things like telemetry. And so I was lucky to be able to help out with that. So anyway, that's kind of it. Um, so let's move on. Talk about
Okay.
the topic.
Well, yeah, let's talk about this topic. This topic, people don't realize how closely coupled our electric grid is with our telecommunications networks, cellular, you name it. So, can you help us understand how we got there, how we got to where we are today?
Yeah, I think so. This story's been going on for a number of years, so I'm just barely old enough to be able to tell a little bit of the story. So, yeah, maybe this might be a good time to bring up the slide where we try to show
Oh, yeah,
the two technologies together.
there we go. It's up.
All right. So, um, the story starts, well, the power generation story vastly predates 1960, right? Even, but I'm going to kind of start the story by about 1960, somewhere in the 60s realm. The large electric utilities had become a reality. In those days, they pretty much had their own telecommunications networks, largely analog microwave and
Hmm.
the lights. Um, there really weren't any small generators to speak of, and there weren't the cogeneration era hadn't started. So in that world, I would have felt more comfortable than I do today. But anyway, moving on as life goes, the federal government passed a law saying that um, small cogenerators, people who generate both electricity and use the fuel that's used to generate the electricity for some ancillary purpose, can now or actually have to be allowed to produce power into the power grid. So you're bringing in, a whole new group of people that heretofore were not part of the equation. And also, small power providers were also welcomed into the power grid.
Hmm.
So, this is kind of in the 1978, I think, is when that actually federal law was passed. So now on the parallel side, on the communication side, we were just now starting to delve into a digital world with T1s and DSL and ASL, ADSL, Sonnet, etc. But what happened was when we bring in these new generators, they needed to be tied into the communication network. And again, I should back up. I'm probably getting ahead of myself here. The main, of course, the main, there's several main functions that telecom has to do with power. Probably the most obvious is the fact that telecommunications is required in order to have SCADA so that you can, for example, here in California, our grid is rebalanced every 5 seconds. So a power grid can't operate unless the generation and load are equally matched. So it's not only matching the generation and load, it also matters where the generation and where the load are, because if the generation and load are not in the same place, now you're relying on power lines that can potentially be overloaded. So you have to keep your eye on all that stuff in real time. So it became necessary, obviously, to telecom wise integrate these new entrants into the power generation realm, the cogenerators and the small power providers. So because the utilities didn't really feel the need, particularly in this day and age, to build out telecommunications to each of these largely small. I think these cogeneration plants and the small generators were generally unit sizes of 80 megawatt, 80. 80 megawatts or less. So they're relatively small in the big picture of things. So anyway, the obvious thing was let the telephone company provide those connections. That way they didn't have to build private infrastructure out to these folks. Anyway, meanwhile, the time marches on. We start going into the 1990 realm, and we start to see the long haul fiber providers emerge. The beginning of the IP networks over, remember the AOL, you've got mail, and we're starting to get into
Yeah.
that realm where things are starting to move in the IP direction. And we start to have these competitive access providers that are providing big business services over fiber, etc. Anyway, but the real important change happened, at least here in California, uh, around the year 2000 with the deregulation of the wholesale side of the power market. And what happened there, and I don't completely know the reason why, and you asked me, and I didn't have a good answer. So, but the utilities, for the most part, sold their generation assets to other private companies. And I guess they figured that the easy money was to be made in uh, you know doing the delivery of the power, transmission and delivery of the power. I don't know, but anyway, from a telecommunications side, so that meant that now not only the little guys, but now the big power plants are now being pushed off the private utility communication networks onto the public teleco network. So that was one important change. And the other thing was the creation of independent system operators. The ISO is responsible. It's supposed to be a neutral and is a neutral party that coordinates the fleet of generation to keep it in balance in real time and do a number of other things. So um, anyway, um, along this same time period after the turn of the century, telecom networks were continuously evolving at the same time, right? So you had um, at least the beginning networks that were being used uh, for the power grid were basically IP over TDM. So it was IP packets now over the traditional TDM network, which was T1s and whatnot, right? Um, and on the consumer side, the landscape was beginning to change with things like cable modems and private ISPs and things like that were happening. So, but the big takeaway here is this was like a huge shift when the large power plants basically left the private utility networks and moved over to the telecom side. So now 2010 happens. And these dates could be off a little bit, but we get into the green energy explosion, and that's a whole other story. We'll talk about that later. But um, I guess one important thing to note about the green energy explosion is that in order to integrate uh, the green energy, which comes and goes, like during the day the sun shines, and at night you've got to switch back to your conventional resources. So the amount of churn that occurs on the power grid to keep it completely in balance has increased exponentially just because of the integration of the green energy resources into the
Yeah.
mix. Now, meanwhile, our buddies at the telephone company were hell bent on retiring all the
Carbon.
copper
Yeah.
infrastructure, and unfortunately, a lot of the electric power generation and the control of such was still on copper resources, right? And uh, you know, but things are starting to change. Fiber was being built into people's neighborhoods. But the
Hmm.
key there is that the build out of the new modern infrastructure was really focused on where there were a lot of people, a lot of customers, and a lot of revenue. A lot of these power plants are not in the middle of the city; they're out somewhere distant, right? So that creates a problem because now you have a telco dependency, and a telco that is, for the most part, may not be in a position or may not want to provide service. So um, anyway, so now we're we're past COVID. We're in the 2020 world, and in this day and age, here in California, there are basically three options being offered to people to join in the power generation team, and that is IP over T1, which is sort of the preferred option, although
Yeah.
not available everywhere. And in fact, simultaneously, it's almost like a little bit of schizophrenia within the carrier markets, in as much as particularly and I have to say that AT&T is a very good company, and I'm glad that our network in California is on AT&T because they've got some phenomenal assets.
Mm.
But I think internally there's a just a little bit of schizophrenia going on with um, the pull on one side to get rid of this old stuff, on the other side the need to keep important things like the energy control network whole. So but it's going well. But so you've got IP over T1s. You also have IP over fiber where it's available, and that of course is the modern preferred option. And finally, when one and two don't work, there are ways to create a VPN connection over a
Mm.
cellular modem. I mean, a cable modem, which to me I cringe thinking about that, just because most cable modem infrastructure has overloading issues, and there's a lot of infrastructure between the head end of my house. So in a power failure, there's almost 100% probability that it's going to fail. And
Yeah.
of course, LTE has matured, and the LTE technology is pretty darn good. And the LTE technology has allowed bandwidth reuse to be done rather smoothly. In the forerunners to LTE, a lot of times you would find that coverage was good on the road, but if you go a few blocks off the road, things would get rocky. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that they had to tune the cells to optimize or minimize the interference on frequency reuse, so that the areas where there weren't problems is where the people and the roads were, right? So,
Right.
but that's better with LTE technology. So,
So
so
one of the things I noticed is when I looked at this slide is the explosion of the telco world, while the power world just really nothing happened except for the green energy towards the end, right? But basically, it's you know
well, that's probably true. I mean, it's there's been less. It has changed more slowly, for to be
right,
sure,
yeah,
and yeah, and that's a good point. Even though the ownership of some of the assets have changed, the actual power grid hasn't changed a whole lot. But
right.
yeah, so
Right. And just so the audience knows about the noise, I think Mrs. Smith was vacuuming or something.
no, actually, the
Oh,
gardener
is
is at
that the
my house.
gardener? I
Yeah.
figured somebody was running a vacuum or something.
So, so before I now going into the whole why this all matters, I think
Mm.
that's where we need to back up to. I mean, um, but before I start talking about some of the cracks in the dam regarding telecom and power, I have to say that there are a whole bunch of, the goal is to keep the generation and load in balance, right? But there's a lot of good procedures and safeguards and things that go into the mix. It's not just the SCADA. So you have a lot of day ahead planning to figure out what the weather's like, what they know historically on particular dates, what the load is going to be. So the lineup of generation and where the load's going to be is pretty much figured out in advance. So the amount that has to be tweaked in real time normally is relatively small. So that's one of the things, and there's a whole bunch of things like that that help minimize the risk of keeping the grid in balance. Although California is kind of unique. I could share my screen, but I'm afraid I'm
Yeah.
going to drop the call.
Here,
But
hang on.
anyway,
I'll go over there. Let's see if we can. Oh, nope, it just still shows up. Go ahead and try to share your screen. I'll bring up. I don't think it'll drop the call.
Okay, here we go.
Just remember you have to click.
It says stop sharing. What the heck? What are you seeing for me?
Oh, you are sharing, but when I click on it, I see the podcast. So you need to share. You need to go to
Oh,
the screen you want to share.
okay. I want to share. Hold on.
There
That
you,
screen.
there you go. Okay, now I can bring it up. There we go.
Okay, so this is a snapshot in time from last Easter, and if you can see it, California was running on 84.3% green energy at this particular time in the afternoon. Um, Now, think about what happened. And this is where it gets really scary. Think about what happened in Spain, and they were not anywhere near this loaded with green energy. So this amount of green energy, particularly when you consider the fact that almost essentially all of this energy is running through inverters that might just happen to have been purchased from Chinese
I know.
sources.
Exactly.
This is a scary thought that if the rumors about backdoors on Chinese inverters is even sort of true, the opportunity to create a ripple in the pond enough to topple the California grid, it's a scary thought. But anyway, never minding all that for a minute. The other part of this is I want to talk a little bit about the Chinese fire drill that California goes through twice a day. So we are the leader in green energy. Well, Texas may argue with this, but we are the leader in reducing greenhouse gas. So that, I guess we can say we're winning that race. But in order to do that, we have to essentially transition between conventional generation over to green energy and back to conventional energy twice a day. And the amount of energy we're talking about here, we're talking about um, probably as much as possibly as much as 20 gigawatts. In terms of a percentage, that's basic over half the generation that's being juggled around. And keep in mind that um, this juggling is so vast now that it's not just juggling California assets within the Cal ISO or within LADWP or any of the other local balancing authorities. We are juggling the apple cart
Hmm.
with the state of Arizona and probably with the Pacific Northwest as well. So it's like I remember you guys probably, Maria, you probably somewhere you worked, you probably had a safety training about your line of strength and balance. Have you ever heard that discussion?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so basically what they taught us where I worked is, when you're out working on something, you want to stay in your green zone where, you're not going to be stretching yourself, or you're not going to be in a position where you could easily fall over. Well, inherently, what we're doing here in California is exactly that. We're operating in the red zone, and we do it every day. Now, I personally thought that we would actually have some problems, but in reality, it's done very eloquently. In fact, I happen to have a microgrid in my house, so I have a poor man's synchroscope, which amounts to a pair of light bulbs that are basically tied between the 60 hertz of my microgrid, which is a crystal controlled 60 hertz, exactly right, and the power grid. So as the frequency of the power grid starts to shift, the lights start to get bright and dim, and the time it takes to go through an entire cycle is exactly equal to the frequency difference. And what I found from watching this is that they can actually make this transition using the SCADA and the telecommunications twice a day, and the grid is extremely stable. It doesn't vary. I mean, it occasionally will vary, maybe 500ths of a hertz, but that's rare. So, in fact, there's also, I don't have it in front of me, but there's an app you can get on your cell phone called FNet, and it actually is hosted by a university somewhere where you can actually see in real time the frequency of the Western grid, the Eastern grid, the Texas grid, and grids all around the world. And I have to say, in spite of what we do here on the West Coast, we're the best.
In spite of all this.
In spite of all this.
But
So,
so it's
anyway,
interesting. I mean, I come from the cyber world, and I used to hack quite a bit, not so much anymore. But and I'm not probably saying anything that they haven't thought of already, right?
yeah,
I would say one of the ideal opportune times um, to attack the grid in California, especially, is during that Chinese fire drill when it's making
yeah,
that switch with the inverter, right?
yes,
Probably from night to light. In other words, from the coal fire power to solar because of the inverters being compromised.
right, right.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, or in the afternoon. I mean, right? Yeah, so yeah, either one or the other. Yes.
yeah. One or the other. One or the other. It's that's
Now, I have to say, one of the things that, even though we also have in California a vast amount of battery storage, we have in excess, and I'm not sure exactly how much, but I've estimated it by integrating the area under a curve of a CalISO website, somewhere in the order of 20 or 25 gigawatt hours of storage. That's a lot of batteries. In fact, translating that into tons of hazardous waste, that's about 300,000 tons of batteries. And those batteries have been used constructively in stabilizing the grid, and they can be brought to bear pretty quickly. But I don't know what percentage of the inverter resources are considered grid forming inverters that can actually emulate what a piece of synchronous equipment does in terms of being able to, if the grid tries to slow down, jacking up the power, and similarly, if the grid gets too fast, backing off. So that's one of the safety mechanisms built into all the conventional generation. So I don't know how much of that is there. And also, a lot of these solar farms use static VAR compensation.
hmm
So I don't know, in terms of dealing with, um, ramping the power up and down fast and also handling the VARs. I'm not sure how adept, these resources help, but I don't know if we're there yet. I do know that all this green energy must be expensive. I can only say that because uh, I'm paying not today, but during the summertime, 63 cents a kilowatt hour. If you guys can believe that, and that's just I don't understand it.
That's why I moved out of California, but that's for another story.
Anyway,
But telcos are really important to restarting the grid. Can you discuss the symbiotic relationship with
yeah,
the telcos and the grid in a restart in case of a black sky event or any other extended power outage?
yeah, that's where that's where the story gets kind of dicey.
Mm.
So the telecommunications grid at best has about 8 hours of backup. So now after if the power's out from so what happens if we have a black sky event? The utilities have a strategy for black starting, but if they can't restore power within that 8 hour period, things become exponentially more difficult because now you can't see what's going on. You really can't balance the grid effectively. You can't even communicate. So and the other thing that I think people don't think about is we migrated to operating the grid over a wide area. So we have things like the California ISO, which works wonderfully if everything is working. But if the grid were to break up, I don't think the telecommunications is even wired in such a way that you could actually take a small area like the Bakersfield metropolitan area and have the communications go to a central location here because the telecommunications network itself is wired up you don't see this when everything's working, but if you have, one person on Verizon's network and another person's on AT&T's network, those networks today don't come together in every town. Most of the handoffs between the major carriers occur in these locations, like one Great Oaks in the Bay Area and one Wilshire in down in LA. So they call these carrier hotels, and they're tier four power and cooling hardened facilities, and it's where all the cross connects occur between the utilities. So, and like for example, I mean, I'm going on a limb here because I don't completely know what I'm talking about, but sometimes on my cell phone, when I'm on the internet on my cell phone, the ads that start popping up, I'm in Bakersfield, right? So the ads start popping up for places in Sacramento. So that tells me that the actual place where the cell phone provided internet connection actually hits the larger internet is probably in Sacramento. So again, if you had a need to communicate locally, between the power generations in the Bakersfield metropolitan area, the communications may not even be, the architecture is not right for that, is what I'm saying. So it gets extremely complicated when things start to fall apart. Um, and I think that's one of the things that I know we've been talking about, Lynn Janusik in our task force is realize that one of the simple things that we need to be able to do is when there is an emergency situation is have a way to downshift doing simple things like not sending power over vast distances, and at some point if things get really rocky, be prepared to break the grid into the smaller pieces, so if it does crash, you're not going to lose the entire western or eastern grids. And some of that stuff can be done with pre-planning. I don't know how far that I don't know that anybody, including the electric utilities, want to hear that kind of talk. But we need to start thinking out of the box. So how to make ourselves, how to make ourselves, get us back to being able to stand on our line of strength and balance again, right?
Right.
So yeah. So anyway, that I could go on, but I've told you more than I actually know.
Well, you mentioned something about Denver at one point that they moved a critical part of
Oh,
yeah.
yeah,
Let's
yeah.
hear
No,
you.
I have a little story. The electric grid is kind of complicated, but I had a little story about the pipeline, my experience with the oil and gas pipeline. So when I first came to work here in California, the communication along the basically the Taft to Kalinga part of the pipeline was all open wire lines. So every station was manned 24 hours a day, and you had a party line telephone and a big buzzer. One buzzer was for station one and two buzzers for station two. So, the operator would get on the line if his station was buzzed. Well, open wire open wire telephones are not that reliable. So one of the first jobs I had was to put in an analog microwave system. So we put in a microwave system and a SCADA system along with it, and we were able to establish a control center in Bakersfield, California. And so now we were only manning the pipelines during the day, and at night we could safely run them from Bakersfield. Well, fast forward a couple of years, and Getty gets bought out by Texaco, and Texaco is based pipeline for Texaco is based out of Denver, Colorado. So having seen the success of what was done at the local level in California, a higher level control center was set up in Denver, Colorado, and the one in Bakersfield was kept as an unmanned place that people could go. If something happened to the communication back to Denver, you could always reman the Bakersfield Control Center. And so that worked well. Everything worked fine from Denver. And after a while, after everybody became totally confident that this was working, we needed some more office space, and the control center was disbanded, and now the control was completely from Denver. Well, fast forward now, Chevron buys Texaco, and the same sort of evolution happens, and now all of the United States pipelines are run out of Houston, Texas, with a backup control center in Midland, Texas. So now, at this point of the game, now you have no one normally at the pump station, and not even enough employees in the region to be able to man the pump stations. Even if you took the secretaries and the janitors, I don't think you'd have enough people to go to every place. So hence, this is kind of what happened with the Colonial Pipeline, right? They're
Exactly. I wanted you to bring it up. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is the way we do things. We build on our successes. We trust our technology, but we don't often, since this happens over such a long period of time, we don't often reflect on what we're doing and what if we had to back up a step. And that's kind of where we are on the power grid too. So anyway,
Yeah. It's all interconnected. That's something that people really don't understand is we've created so much interdependencies between sectors.
yes,
Oil and gas, telco, the grid. I mean, those three alone run America, right? Any one of those, one goes if the grid goes down, the other two go down. So, but
exactly. But
that's
the one between power and telecom is particularly important because two reasons. One, power and telecom threads into everything else, but moreover, because it falls apart at about 8 hours. That's the scary thought.
yeah, yeah, and y- again, going back to that uh, timeline that you had there earlier. Now, throw in the modernization of what we call smart grids, right? That use the telecommunications networks,
Yeah.
as well, to do all sorts of things, monitoring, cameras, sensors, all kinds of things are now communicating over uh, the telco network. And so
Exactly.
that, go
Yeah,
ahead.
I had a thought. I'm losing the thought here, but uh, go ahead. I'll think of it.
No, no, no. I was just like, what are your, now we're even relying more,
Yeah, I mean,
on that than ever.
yeah, no, that's absolutely true. I mean, you start thinking about these these, I'm going to call them crummy little inexpensive IoT devices that operate in
Hmm.
unlike LoRaWAN and stuff like that. They're good for. I guess they're a good way to expand the amount of information that you can gather inexpensively and bring into your organization. But the line becomes fuzzy. Is like once you're relying on that information to make important decisions, is that network and everything involved with it suitable anymore? And that's the question I don't know.
Right,
So,
right, right.
yeah. Oh, I know what I was going to say. I thought I didn't know this, but in California, we have over a gigawatt of virtual power plants. You're going to say, what the heck is a virtual power plant?
Yeah,
Virtual power plant is 100,000 Tesla power walls that are all linked over the internet that the ISO could control like it was a big power plant resource. And I'm thinking, well, that's cool, but wait a minute. You're controlling a gigawatt of power over the public internet? Um, and obviously in this case, most of those communication networks are cable modems or whatever people have at their house, right? So
mm,
it's just, yeah. And then you think about the smart meters. The smart meters, um, those networks, I think here in California are largely not open to the public. They're not on the, not on the, there's a private network that collects that information. But those private networks too can be hacked
Yeah.
And if somebody could actually take control of many thousands or hundreds or even a million smart meters and open all those circuits at the same time, that would be another way to create a ripple in the pond that would be hard to deal with. So all of this stuff is just, you know, it's just a miracle that the lights stay on, Maria.
I know it is really. And I think I was talking to you mentioned him earlier, Leonard Janusik, and I, out of curiosity, just said, "Well, when was the grid? When was the architecture of the grid done?" Being a networking person, I kind of want to know. And I said, "What, the 1920s, 1930s, or 40s? After the war?" And he goes, "No, you're going in the wrong direction." Oh, really? He actually said the 1880s.
Well,
I'm like, really?
yeah, well,
So
we might be better off with an 1880s grid because they would be, essentially small independent grids that wouldn't fail at the same time.
right, right. Um, this is going to be probably a real loaded question. Is there any collaboration happening between the telco and the energy sector? Do they work together
Um,
at some point to just make sure that there's
I
some
well, my observation is not very much. I mean, a little tiny slice of the telco,
Mhm.
obviously the little part of the telco organization that's involved with electric power, of course they do. But in terms of at the highest at the sea levels, not so much, right? I mean, as far as so I'm gonna my answer would be probably not much.
Not much.
But again, I don't know that for a
That's
fact.
that's so reassuring. Along with everything else. But I'm gonna go. I'm gonna throw 5G in there, or 5G, 6G, whatever it is. But we've seen since the lockdowns, these massive towers, right, going up.
Yeah,
Yeah, and so that in and of itself has to play a role in uh, in just even using power. Some of them are really huge. They're really the size of like a 30, 40
yeah,
story building that you see.
yeah. Well, yeah, there's definitely a proliferation of towers, and
Mhm.
I don't remember the statistic about how much of our grid's energy is actually used in telecommunications. I have to believe it's still a small fraction of the total. But we start talking about data centers coming and retirement of coal power plants. That's a whole nother story, right? Of that whole
Right.
evolution. But to your point about the G's, the people that have been writing the long term evolution standard have started trying to bake into the standard the ability to handle some low latency communication paths through the cellular networks. And I don't think any of the carriers have actually implemented this, but one other thing I didn't talk about that's another codependency with telecom and power is the ability to coordinate protective relaying. So it's called transfer tripping.
Hmm.
One of the things the utilities do, and usually over their own fiber or over their own infrastructure, but sometimes over the telecommunications, particularly if it involves one of these, third-party provided power plants, is transfer tripping. Basically, that's where you coordinate breakers so that you minimize if something happens, you quickly figure out where the fault is and you break the circuit in a way that doesn't screw up the larger part of the network. But that requires action that happens within 30 milliseconds. You can't do 30 milliseconds through a traditional cell phone network. Typical latency on a cell phone network is, at least for a voice call, on the order of 1 or 200 milliseconds, which is game over by then. So But again, the technology is being evolved so that someday they can do that. The other thing to think about with particularly with the 5G and 6G and these small cells that operate in the very high frequency bands, the 60
Mhm.
and 80 gigahertz, so that you can literally have over a gigabit to your cell phone. That's incredible. But
Right.
these things that operate at these very high frequencies don't cover a lot of geographic areas. So you've got to have more towers, and more towers means more backup power systems. And
Exactly.
the more complicated this whole network becomes, the more fragile it is in terms of protecting the infrastructure from the simple things like no power.
Right.
Um, yeah, and not to mention all the complexity and all of that.
Yeah. So
So
Dave Phelps has a question in the chat. It says, "How would a hemp E3 or a GMD E3 affect the telecommunications system?"
well, an E3, as far as I know, would not directly affect the telecommunication system, unless, of course, it caused a power outage. In that case, it's back to the same deal.
Right. Right.
Now, an E1, I don't even want to talk about an E1 because an E1, as you know, will fry electronics in so many places that the chances that we can get our act together in timely fashion is zero. I mean, that's horrible because now you not only have things broken, but you have things broken in many, many places, and your ability to respond to correct those problems is now hampered for because all your infrastructure that you depend on is now messed up. So we don't want to talk about that.
But that is a scenario that can happen.
Yes, it is, and you would think, as dependent as we are on our two most precious infrastructures, our power and our telecom, that we would be further along in protecting that from the hemp. It's you know it's scary stuff.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned you had a microgrid in your home. How are you integrating, that, if you can share with us what you're doing.
Okay, all right. Well, I have a simple microgrid, all homemade, no computers in it. Um, I have about 8,000 watts of solar panels and about 50 kilowatt hours of genuine Costco lead acid batteries because I'm afraid of the new fancy batteries, lithium batteries.
Hmm.
Uh, my neighbors are already having a fit. I have so many batteries. So, but anyway, um, I also have a portion, like a lot of people that have microgrids, have a portion of their house sectioned off so that it's always running on the microgrid. Like my TV, my refrigerator, my internet, some of the lights, all that stuff is never on PG&E. But then in a real emergency, I can actually divert, put my whole house on the microgrid. But here's the thing: I'm learning a hard lesson this winter because we've had an unusual weather phenomena here in Bakersfield the last 3 weeks. The sun's only shined about 2 hours, so if 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 we were to have a grid down situation right now, I would be not completely out of service, but I'd be down to my refrigerator, a few lights, and that's about it. So
So going back to this chart that shows how dependent California is on this green energy and what's been happening, I know for a fact that several of these the two of the largest solar producing facilities in the world, Solar Star and what was the name of the other one? Topaz
yeah,
are in the area where you're at, especially Solar Star. I believe it's just southeast of you. And
yeah. Well, yeah, I'm in the southern end of the San Joaquin Valley. So
mhm,
fortunately, they were smart enough to put most of these solar assets out in the Mojave Desert where
Right.
we don't have this weather problem that we have.
Oh, okay.
So I think, I mean, there are a number of solar farms that are affected, but I think for the most part we're okay. Um, and that's probably, you're hitting on another, indirectly on another point here about the cost and efficiency of green energy.
Hmm.
So what happens is you can't completely get rid of your conventional resources because you can't always depend on your green energy, right?
Right.
So so now you're really paying for both types of generation. You know, and even if the generators, of course, are not directly, how can I say, they're private companies, right? But they have to make a positive bottom line. So the traditional generator, I think the CalISO offers several different programs that the conventional generators can participate in. You know, they can be a most favored generator that they can ramp up and down at will. They get paid a little bit more money for their power. Or if you just want to generate on a schedule, you get a little bit less. Um, or if you just want to generate power at a steady pace and never go up or down, you probably get paid even less. But the bottom line is, whatever schedule you're on, you know, you have to make your business work. And this whole thing of integrating green energy, I have to believe, you know, results in a lower efficiency financially of the traditional assets. So that's just one more thing that accounts for my high utility bill.
Right. Would you also say that resiliency is also reduced as a result?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, that's a double-edged sword, right? I mean, on one hand, you start thinking about the vulnerability of that Chinese fire drill. On
Hmm.
the other hand, you've got some things on the plus side of the ledger too, like, you know, having this battery storage that's, hopefully the batteries are never completely empty. Although that's another good point. I mean, even though we're bragging that we have 25 gigawatt hours of energy, uh, that will last about till 9 p.m. And then what are we going to do for the rest of the night? So, you know, we're nowhere near a utopia as in terms of batteries being able to replace traditional, you know, high capacity factor, can ramp it up and down when you need it generation, and that's what we need more of. Um, so, in fact, I heard the other day that California says, I think our governor has said that we are going to add another 50 gigawatts of power by 2035. And I'm not seeing how that's going to happen, but
Yeah, with green energy or
well, with yeah, well, originally it was with green energy. Now the plan may be being tweaked a little bit. Um, you know, we've got, hopefully these small modular reactors will become more you know, more a reality. Um, you know, one of the things I'd like to see is that, you know, hopefully the military bases will start deploying the technology, which will get it kind of germinated.
hmm.
And then if we could apply, and this is where I'm kind of conflicted as to whether this is wise, but it seems on the surface, it seems like if we have critical life safety facilities like our water, wastewater plants, that those ought to be normally off the grid on something like uh, a small modular reactor and use the grid as backup, kind of reverse the equation there. And that would actually do two things. It would actually create resilience for them, but it also would free up grid power so it could be wasted on AI.
Wasted on AI. Yeah, we haven't even touched that subject regarding energy generation and water resources and everything else that goes along with it. But
Yeah.
in closing, what are some of the implications regarding um, that these interdependencies that if you could talk to if you could get a telco executive and a energy producing executive in California together, what 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 would what could prompt them to do something to make this system more resilient in case of a star, black sky event?
Yeah. Well, I would like them just to reflect on let's pretend we had a black sky event. What would we need to do to prepare for it in terms of the way we operate the grid and in terms of the telecom and SCADA support that would actually facilitate doing that more efficiently?
Hmm.
And of course, also, if there's any way that you could entice, the telecommunication providers to, they know where these paths are that are supporting the power grid. If there was something that would require them to provide, instead of 8 hours of backup, 16 hours or 24 hours. So, just having more backup time on the parts of the telecom that are absolutely critical for running the power grid would be helpful. Uh, those are the only obvious things, but
Yeah. Well, I don't see any more questions. Does anyone have any questions in the chat for Rick? This is your opportunity to ask about the just the technology itself. Rick has quite an extensive background in very three industries that make him, absolutely an expert in looking at how we can better plan for any sort of grid down event. And so um,
but honestly, Maria, I've told you everything I know, and then some.
he told me everything I know. Well, that's okay because we're wrapping it up anyways. It's two
All
fifty
right.
four, and I wanted to thank you, Rick, for taking time out of your busy schedule to do this podcast and to help educate the public on the truths about our critical infrastructure. Oh, Ron Fuller does have a question. So here we go. So, who owns the fiber in the middle of transmission lines? Is that the telco?
Um, well, most of the fiber that's actually strung along the power lines,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of that is privately owned by the utilities. Although in some cases, the utilities have leased, allowed uh, telephone companies and other providers to use their right of way for fiber. So I think it's a mixed bag, but generally speaking, I think most of the fiber that's in the OGBW, and I forget what that stands for, but the static wire on the top of a power line oftentimes has fiber optic fibers inside of it
Mm-hmm.
so that they can use the pathway for that purpose. So, um, and OGW, optical ground wire. Now I got it. But yeah,
Okay. Yeah.
so I don't know if that answers this question or not.
Does that answer your question, Ron? Hopefully. Um, but so we wanted to thank you, and we'd like for you to join us next week on the Grid Podcasts, where we're going to have Glenn Rhodes, task force on homeland and national security. And it ought to be a very eye opening dialogue. Glenn is the executive director, and he'll be sharing his history in being involved with the grid and other critical infrastructure, not only in the country, but as well in the state of Colorado. So until then, we thank you for everything. We thank you for joining. And until next week, take care.